Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayla. I am an aspiring author who writes in the fantasy and sci-fi genres. And I'm tired today. So this is going to be another Path to Publishing vlog. So this vlog is going to be focused on the types of editing that you come across when you are trying to get your book published. I have a Starbucks on the way. I think he may have just gotten here. Anyways, when you are traditionally published as an author, part of that process kind of comes with a team of people who are there to basically get your book ready for publication. So that includes editors of different types, sensitivity readers, you know, the people who design your cover. When you finally get a literary agent and you sell your book in a deal to a publishing house, from my understanding, from that point on, everything from getting your book from the point that it's currently at to publication ready is covered by your literary agent. So they have connections to editors and anyone else that you might need, and then they start making money after you actually start selling the book. So that's all fine and dandy if you already have a literary agent, but most of us are not agented. We have to actually get there. I've heard of people getting literary agents and getting agented based on a rough draft of the manuscript. I'm sure it can happen. However, I can only imagine that the stronger your manuscript, the higher the chances of you getting agented in the first place. So I think it's safe to not assume that your manuscript is so incredible that you'll get agented if you don't edit it, and to instead learn everything you possibly can about all of the steps of editing so that you can actually edit your own manuscript and get it as close to publication ready as you think you possibly can. And then that's gonna be a much stronger manuscript to then start submitting to agents and see if anyone wants to represent you. I think it's also important just to understand all of the steps that go into making your book ready for publication. I think that whether or not that's something you're going to be doing down the road regularly, you should still learn how to do it and do it with your books a few times, because it shows the agents that you have cleaner manuscripts to work with. You have a good idea of how to not only write the first draft, but also fix that first draft, do your own developmental edits. You have good grammar and spelling when you go through and do the copy and line edits. Your language and vocabulary is very strong and it works well for whatever you're writing. So there are a lot of benefits to learning how to properly edit your manuscript. And if you decide that you're not going to traditionally publish and you are going to self-publish instead, now you've already done the steps of learning how to properly edit so that less of the editing of your manuscript is going to be outsourced. It'll probably save you money in the long run if you don't have to hire multiple rounds of other editors, if you're able to better do your own editing. Editing is what's going to make your story into something that you would be really proud for other people to read. I know when I started writing, I thought that I was just gonna write a nearly perfect story the first time, and then I was gonna go through and, I don't know, probably fix the spelling errors and maybe adjust some wording here and there, and then it would be good. And that is not the case. So I have been doing research, I have taken classes, I have been looking into and trying to create some sort of task list of the different types of edits that need to be done, and we are going to discuss them. So that is what this vlog is going to be about. I'm gonna have some of my coffee and we're gonna get into it. So let's talk about the different kinds of editing. A lot of this is just gonna be an amalgamation of what I've learned over the years in writing classes, including the most recent one, especially the most recent one, because it touched specifically on editing a novel, a fiction novel. So what I've gathered is that there are three main types of editing. In some situations, kind of depending on who you ask, they might overlap a little bit, and also some people call them different things depending on, I guess, who it is, who you're working with. So the three main types are the substantive edit, which is also sometimes called the developmental edit. Then we've got line editing and we have copy editing. There's also technically proofreading, which is basically just like the final read before it's published. So it should be, you know, reading the proof copy, I guess, so like the final version. And sort of just making sure that nothing was missed. Let's start with the substantive or developmental edit, which is the most major big picture stage of editing, and also one that confused me a little bit because I've heard many people talk about developmental edits, and in my class it's called substantive editing. It's all called substantive editing. What I could gather, developmental editing actually may have used to mean something else. So it was kind of just used as the term to describe developing the story and kind of planning out the story and talking through the story and coming up with an actual structured story. And then substantive editing was kind of editing the structure of the story after it was already written or after the first draft was already written, and kind of going through and making sure that the content made sense, the ideas were clear, there weren't any major plot holes going on or kind of any major world building issues. Things are flowing well, the ideas, arcs, structures within the book are consistent and actually make sense, they're clear and articulated throughout the story. There aren't any kind of continuity issues and just big picture edits like that. I'm pretty sure, correct me if you know a little bit better about, I guess, the nuances of how the words have changed over the years and what they've meant in the past. But from what I can gather, people are pretty much using the words substantive editing and developmental editing interchangeably at this point. So they kind of mean the same thing, which is doing the big picture edits, all of those that I just listed, and kind of just making sure that the story that you wrote in its entirety is making sense. So this is the level of editing that I'm at kind of right now for draft 2. Since I am rewriting, there is a lot of drafting going on, but I am also majorly doing developmental / substantive edits on this current draft. And that is pretty much the first step of editing your manuscript after you've written that first draft, because until you have those structural edits made and everything's making sense in the story, there isn't really any purpose to move on to the next levels of editing. Even if you have super clean writing and you think your structure and prose style is immaculate, which good for you if you think that, I do not believe that of myself, but even if you do, there are always things that are going to change through the developmental or substantive edits. So there isn't really any point to do line editing or copy editing at this early stage because you're just going to change everything anyways. So the next level would be line editing. So I have a feeling if you're very experienced at editing your own books, maybe you are an editor and you also write, that sort of thing, you could probably be someone who line edits and copy edits at the same time. But for someone like me who's starting, and I don't know, probably for the rest of my life, just because I like to break bigger tasks down into smaller tasks to handle, I will probably always keep the two separate. So line editing refers to the editing that you do line by line of your story. So where the developmental or the substantive editing is sort of like a macro analysis, I guess you could call it. I don't know if that's the correct term. That's what I'm using though. Line editing and also copy editing would be more so micro-analysis. So when you're line editing, you're going line by line through your story, you're making sure that everything makes sense, you're making sure that you're avoiding any cliches, any sort of repetition that you have going on. If you keep repeating the same kind of sentence structure or the same phrases or the same sorts of cliches, or maybe even the same word and using the same sorts of descriptions, that'll be caught in line editing. You're making sure that the context is correct for whatever line you're working on. So for example, you're making sure the tone of a sentence or a paragraph fits the emotional tone of the scene that you're working in. You're checking to see if there's some subtext going on within your writing, if the subtext makes sense, or if you're lacking subtext where there should be subtext. You're checking to see if you're maybe over-explaining or over-describing things when you should just be doing it through dialogue or potentially showing someone. You're making sure the words you've chosen, the phrases, any sort of imagery that you're using is matching the tone of the scene. Is your narrative voice consistent, or is it kind of dropping off? This is where you'll notice if there's something in particular that you do that has to do with your strengths and weaknesses as an author. So maybe you do over-explain a lot. This will be caught in your line edits. Or maybe you have a habit of using a cliche that's not necessarily a cliche in general, but you use it so often that it has kind of become your own little cliche. I think that I have multiple of that kind of idea when I write, so I'm probably gonna run into that quite often. So this is the level of editing where you catch all of those sorts of things. So then we go to copy editing. So the way that I understand copy editing is that it is also on a sentence or like word level. It's still at a very micro level within your manuscript, but this has more to do with following the rules of good writing. So copy editing is the level where you're checking to make sure that you are following the rules of spelling and punctuation and grammar and proper word choice. Kind of just that you're following the rules of good quality writing. Also at the copy editing level is, I think, kind of making sure that the way you are writing, so the style and tone that you're using, fits the genre that you're writing within. I think it's more copy editing level because that has to do with actual like rules and structures that are set in place for different types of writing. It's like a formula. Once you get to the copy editing level, that's like a logical formula that you're supposed to follow depending on what you're writing. So for example, if you're writing an adult sci-fi, it's going to be written a little bit different tonally and like stylistically than a YA rom-com that's focused around Christmas. So even though the edits for that might be at like the line level, I don't think it would really be considered a line edit because technically it has to do with the rules and functions of writing in a certain genre. So far, and I've mentioned this before, but we're all learning together. So if you know some helpful tidbits for people, or if you want to correct something I've said, please by all means do so in the comment section below. This is always like an open platform for you to discuss things and, you know, discuss different nuances, especially when it comes to writing your own book. But the way that I think has been most helpful for me to sort of differentiate between the line editing and the copy editing is that the copy editing is a lot more technical. There's still technicalities when it comes to line editing, but the line editing tends to be a lot more personal. It depends like how you write and some of your strengths and weaknesses when it comes to your own personal choices in the book. Whereas when it comes to copy editing, it's not really your choice to like misspell a word or to incorrectly use a semicolon. So there are actual like rules and structures that need to be followed when it comes to copywriting. And all of these things should be done before you are submitting to an agent. So you should have all of these levels of edits done on your manuscript before you actually start querying. So again, from what I've heard, once you get signed, a lot of the time you don't actually have to go through all of these stages all by yourself anymore. You don't have to do that for your own manuscript. Generally, you'll be set up with an editor through your literary agent or through your publisher, and they'll be doing those levels of editing for you and then giving you the corrections, and then you'll apply them and work them back into the story, and it'll kind of go through a cycle like that. But again, it is so much stronger for you to have all of those edits done before you try and market yourself to an agent. I mean, it really is a business, so the less work an agent and editor have to put into you in order to get your work publishable, the better for them, because that's less time and therefore less money for them to have to put into you as an author. So they're going to be more likely to actually want to work with you if they can see that you already put a lot of that work in yourself, you know how it works, you understand the different levels of editing, and you're able to use those to make your story stronger right off the bat. So out of all those types of editing, I honestly think that I'm going to struggle the most with line editing my own work. I think the developmental, substantive editing stuff, the kind of big picture stuff, I have already had the most practice with, I'd say. And for the most part, copy editing as well. I was always someone who enjoyed grammar and punctuation and properly like structuring sentences depending on context and stuff. I think the logical side of my brain really likes that part. So I'm not super worried about those areas, but the line editing I am worried about because I think I have less experience with that. But I also think that line editing might be one of those skills that you kind of get over time from experience, especially as you kind of just like learn about the flow of sentence structure and cliches that exist and all of the kind of like patterns that you can pick out. I think it might be a lot of an experience thing rather than just a technical learning how to do it and then knowing how to do it. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that goes. But anyways, I just talked for so long. I'm gonna have an absolute nightmare cutting this video down, and it's getting dark outside and I need to go and move my body and then shower. So I'm gonna end this path to publishing video here. As always, let me know if you have any questions, things you specifically want me to speak about in the path to publishing videos. Thanks so much for watching. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to smile, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.